Good morning, welcome to Sunday School this week. This week we're thinking all about courage and about how we can be courageous for God. So in my bag here I've got some cards with some different situations on and we're going to have a read of them and see if we think we could be courageous in those situations. So let's have a look at the first one. Ooh, facing a parent after you did something wrong. You'd have to have a lot of courage to do that, wouldn't you? Let's see what's next. Eating a food you've never tried before. I guess it depends what kind of food it is really, doesn't it? If it's trying a different kind of chocolate bar, you might not need to be so courageous for that. If it was trying something really random that you've never tried before, you might need quite a lot of courage to do that one. Try the next one. Or helping a classmate that everyone laughs at. That can take some courage to stand up for somebody when other people are being unkind to them, but it's something that's really important to do. So if we have a think about these three, I wonder which one would take the most courage. Or I think maybe facing a parent after you did something wrong. That can take a lot of courage if you know you've done something wrong and you know you might get into trouble for it, but you're still going to own up and tell the truth about it. So there are lots of different times when we might need to show courage. Maybe during a sports event at school, maybe doing something difficult, something new at school. Today our story is all about somebody who showed a lot of courage, so let's dig a bit deeper into God's Word.
Our Bible story today is about somebody who had to be really, really brave and show a lot of courage. Our story today is called The Brave Queen, and it's all about somebody called Esther. Esther was Jewish. That means that she was an Israelite. She lived in the land of Persia with her older cousin Mordecai. The king of Persia needed a new queen. He announced, "Bring the most beautiful woman from all over my kingdom." Esther was one of the women sent to the palace. When the king met Esther, he chose her to be his queen. Haman was the king's chief helper. He hated the Jewish people. They were God's people. Haman wanted everyone to bow down to him. One day, Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman. Mordecai would only bow down to God. Haman went to the king. He said, "The Jews are bad people. You should sign a law that will help me get rid of them." So the king signed the new law. God's people were in great danger. Mordecai heard about the new law. He ran to tell Esther, "You must save yourself and the rest of God's people. Perhaps God's made you the queen for this reason." So Esther came up with a plan. It would be very risky for her. Esther invited the king and Haman to a special dinner. Then she asked the king, "Why does Haman want to get rid of me?" The king was surprised. She said, "I'm Jewish. Haman tricked you into signing a law that would get rid of all the Jews." The king told his guards, "Arrest Haman." Then he made Mordecai his new chief helper. He told Queen Esther, "I will make a new law that will keep you and your people safe." God used Esther to save his people. Now, what this story doesn't say is that when Esther invited the king to a special dinner, she had to do something incredibly important. Nobody was allowed to go and see the king without being invited. You'd be put to death. So Esther had to break that rule and go and see the king to invite him to her special dinner. Wasn't that a brave thing to do? So in our story, we saw all about Queen Esther, the brave queen. Got a quick quiz to see how much you've understood. Are you ready? Question number 1. What did Esther do that took great courage? Can you remember? What did she have to do? Can you remember? She went to see the king even though it was against the law. She had to break a rule and she could have been killed. That definitely took a lot of courage. Question 2. What happened because of Esther's courage? So when brave Queen Esther went to see the king, what happened next? If you know it, shout it out. The Jewish people were allowed to protect themselves. They didn't die, which is brilliant news, isn't it? God used Queen Esther in a very clever way. If you'd been in Queen Esther's situation, what do you think you would have done? Would you have been brave enough to break a rule and go and see the king because you knew it was the right thing to do? It's difficult to know, isn't it? Esther found out an important truth, that God works through us when we're courageous for him. If you're courageous, it means you've got a lot of courage. You can be very brave. Now, there was somebody else in the story who was very courageous for God. Who might it have been? Can you remember their name? It's quite an unusual name. It was Mordecai. Mordecai was courageous when he refused to bow down and worship Haman. He knew what the right thing to do was, and he stuck to it. He was courageous for God. So Mordecai also found the same truth as Queen Esther. When we're courageous for God, God can work through us. Esther was the queen. Mordecai was just a regular person, just like you or me. But both of them were courageous for God, and God worked through them. God worked through us when we're courageous for him.
If you were going to be courageous for God this week, what would you do? When you're courageous for God, you might get laughed at by your friends. You might suffer for God, but it's worth it. When you place your trust in God, you don't need to be afraid. Just like he did with Esther and Mordecai, God works through us when we're courageous too. So this week we're going to make a courage journal. You'll find out a little bit more about how we're going to use it in a moment, but first of all we're going to make it together. So I've got a piece of paper here and I've just folded it in half, and then I've folded one piece back this way and one piece this way to make a bit like a zigzag book, and we're going to use this to make our courage journal. So on the front of it I'm just going to write my courage journal. You can decorate yours however you want to as well. And then on each, you can see that, on each piece I'm going to write the day of the week. So today's Sunday, we're going to start our week with Monday. And then Tuesday. Wednesday. So we've got each day of the week written on there. And then we're going to flip over the page and write Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday on the other side. Then when you fold it up, it makes it into a little book, and you're going to use this for your courage journal this week. So we know that Esther and Mordecai were really courageous for God, and God worked through them. So this week your challenge is to try and be courageous for God as well. So you're going to use your courage journal that we made earlier, and this week you're going to have a think every day of something you could do to be courageous for God. Maybe it'll be something quite big, maybe it could be something really small, and that's okay, because God works through us in lots of different ways. So each day, when you have a think about what you're going to do to be courageous for God, you can write it down in your courage journal. Maybe one day you're going to be courageous for God by helping a friend or someone is laughing at them or being unkind to them. Maybe you're going to be courageous for God by telling the truth and owning up to something that you might have done. So every day when you do something courageous for God, I want you to write it in your courage journal, and by the end of the week it should be full up with 7 different things that you've done to show how courageous you've been this week. And remember, just like God stuck by Esther and Mordecai, he will stick by you and he will help you through it as well. Right, we're going to pray just to finish off our Sunday school time today. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for letting us know about people like Esther and Mordecai, who were so courageous for you. Help us to want to be that courageous for you. Help us to look for times that we can stand up for you. Help us to do the right thing even when others don't. Help us find ways to share our faith with others. Amen. Hope you have a really good time trying to be courageous this week, and we'll see you next week.